everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am here for my recent reads video or my January wrap up. This year I'm going to be doing these kinds of videos a bit differently than how I did last year. So last year, if you haven't been following me for a while, I was doing mid-month and end of the month wrap-ups where I was talking about every single book that I read. And it's gotten to a point where wrap-ups are some of my least favorite videos to film, and I think that's because I'm forcing myself to talk about every single book that I've read, including books that I just don't think are all that noteworthy. There are some books that I read and I've given them like 3, maybe 4 stars, and like they were good, but I just don't feel the need to discuss them with you all or to recommend them. So in 2023, I want to try something a bit different where I only discuss the best and the worst books that I read in any given month. These are the books that I feel are noteworthy to talk about, whether because I absolutely loved them or I hated them or I DNF'd them, you know, anything like that. So in the month of January, I read a total of 28 books. I would have liked to have read a bit more than that. Hopefully in February, I can get more books read, even though there's only 28 days in the month. We will just have to see. But I did read some really great books in January, and I also read some not so great books. I DNF'd, meaning I did not finish 2 books this month, which is very unusual for me because I've been consistently reading since about 2018, and that's how long I've had my YouTube channel as well. And over the years, I've gotten better and better at discerning my own reading tastes and picking out books that I really think I'm going to enjoy. So when it turns out that I'm not loving a book so much that I decide to put it down, that's very rare for me. But the first one that I DNF'd was In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This is a memoir. In 2023, I want to try to read more nonfiction, and that includes memoirs. And so this is the story of Yeonmi as she defected from North Korea when she was about 12 years old. And so I found the writing for this to be very dry. I really wanted to love this book and be really invested in Yeonmi's story, but as it was going along, I was listening to the audiobook and reading the physical book at the same time. Like, it was just very boring after a while. And so I put it down and I wanted to see what other people thought that also didn't love this book. And I was seeing quite a few 1-star reviews, which of course that's not uncommon. Any given book is going to have a lot of 1-star reviews, you know, but I was seeing that quite a few people giving it 1 stars were saying that there is evidence that this book may not be all like 100% truthful. And so I did some research on my own. I did some Googling, and I found one article in particular, I will link it down in the description below, that cites all of the evidence of how Yeonmi has basically contradicted herself numerous times when she has told her life story to different people that are interviewing her, and then the version that is in the book is also different from maybe a version that she told someone else. I find that to be very bizarre, but basically there is very strong evidence that this book is not 100% truthful, which is very disappointing because you go into a memoir thinking that it's going to be the truth, and apparently that's not the case. So I'm glad that I ultimately decided to put this book down for that reason as well. And then the other book that I DNF'd was It Ain't Me Babe by Tilly Cole. This is book 1 in a Motorcycle Club romance series. I've never read a Motorcycle Club series before, now that I'm thinking about it, but I remember Bree from In Love and Words talking about this series sometime back, as well as just like MC romances in general. And she was talking about how she hates the way that these men talk about women. So I did go into this book with some caution, but basically we have our hero who is the leader of his motorcycle club, and he is mute. Well, he has a stutter, but he doesn't want to show that to anyone, so he's selective mute. And then we have the heroine. So I believe like all the heroines in the series are coming from this cult that's nearby, and so the heroine narrowly escapes the cult, and she's like dying on this motorcycle club's doorstep, and so they take her in and take care of her, and it's supposed to be a romance between the two of them. But I DNF'd this 11% into this book. Oh man, the way that these men talk about women, it is just as bad as Bree said. I was hoping that she was over exaggerating, but she really isn't. They refer to women as bitches and sluts and words like that. And apparently the term bitch is a term of endearment according to the glossary of this book, but it certainly doesn't come across that way. And like, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So if there are motorcycle club series out there where the men are actually respectful of women, like, please let me know in the comments. I'm very curious. I would like to find MC romances that I actually like. But yeah, it had just gotten to a point where they were using these terms over and over and over again, and it really got to me, to the point where I really just had to put the book down. Also, I wasn't invested in the story, and I'm sure part of that was because I was like so offended by how they were talking about these women. But yeah, I just like wasn't invested really in the two main characters either. So yeah, clearly this book isn't for me. I don't think this series is gonna be for me, and that's unfortunate because I really did go into this with high hopes. I have some friends that gave this book and a lot of the books in this series 5 stars, so I did go into this with some pretty high expectations. So now let's move on to a couple of books that I did finish that I didn't really love. First of all is Twisted Loyalties by Cora Riley. This is book 1 in her Kimura Chronicles series, which is a spin-off of the Born in Blood Mafia Chronicles, which is a series that I have enjoyed. I went into this first book with very high expectations because I feel like people just rave and rave and rave about the Kimura Chronicles in general. Now I know that they're specifically really raving about books 2 and 3, but I assumed that this book was amazing. And so this is Fabiano's romance. So Fabiano was a young boy in the Born in Blood Mafia Chronicles. He is the younger brother of a couple of the heroines from that series, and so his character and his romance had been built up for so many books. I had very high expectations, and it's his romance with this girl, Leona. They're both like 18, 19, something like that. This takes place in Vegas, by the way, this whole series, and she is very poor, down on her luck, and she moves to Vegas to live with her father, who's kind of a piece of shit. And so she ends up working at this bar that Fabiano has some influence at, and they start falling for each other. But I just expected more from this romance. I liked the setup. I was really enjoying probably, I would say, like the first 25% of this book or so, but as it went along, it was becoming very clear to me that this wasn't going to be an amazing romance. And by the last 30% or so, I was zoning out a lot while listening to the audiobook. So this wasn't great. I gave it like 3 stars on Goodreads, and I would probably give it like a 2.5 star. It's my least favorite book by Cora Riley that I've read so far, but I still have very high hopes for Twisted Emotions and Twisted Pride, which are books 2 and 3 of the series. I want to talk about a kind of meh book that I read within an amazing series. So you guys may be aware, and I mentioned this earlier, that January was the Folk of the Air read-along that I co-hosted with some of my amazing friends, Samantha, Christy, Melissa, and Chandler, and we did live show discussions for all of the books in this series, and that starts with the Cruel Prince trilogy. I just can't stop staring at these covers. They're absolutely stunning. I was rereading this series. I had read this trilogy for the first time back in like 2020. I was reading The Lost Sisters, that novella, for the first time, and then obviously I was reading The Stolen Heir for the first time because that's the new book of the series. But I had such an amazing time rereading this series and discussing these books with my friends and with you guys in the comments. I just feel like there is no series quite like The Folk of the Air. Like, it's just such an iconic trilogy. The Queen of Nothing is still my personal favorite book of the series. It may not be like the best written book of the series, but it just holds such a special place in my heart, and I know I'm in the minority of that. I know most people like kind of hate that book, but it just, I personally really love it. Jude, our main character, I mean, she's an icon, she's a legend, she's the moment, and Carden is amazing as well. Like, their enemies to lovers romance is so unique and amazing to me. There's just nothing quite like it that I've found, at least. I mean, if you guys have recommendations for romances that truly give Jude and Carden vibes, please let us know in the comments, because I would be very intrigued to find more books with their vibe. But Holly Black is just an amazing writer, in my opinion, of writing these kind of fairy stories. Her writing style is just like very intentional. Every sentence is important, you know, and it's just truly amazing, you know. So I'm really glad that I finally reread this trilogy. And then I do want to mention The Stolen Heir, but unfortunately this is more on the meh side of things. So I did give this 4 stars, but honestly, like upon reflection, it feels more like a 3.5 stars because by the way, I'll quickly explain what's going on in, this is a spin-off duology of the trilogy. We are following Oak and Seren. This takes place 8 years after the original trilogy. And so it's a completely different story. This ends up being a quest actually, which are not my favorite kinds of fantasy stories. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I didn't love this. But as well written as this book was, because like I said, Holly Black knows how to write fairy stories. There were a couple of questions floating through my mind throughout reading this book. One was, did the story need to be written? I don't think it did. And 2, do I truly care about these characters? And the answer again is no. I'm very intrigued to see what happens with the next book, The Prisoner's Throne, because I feel like this whole first book was just a setup to get us to the real story of this duology. I think that story is going to be more interesting, and I think that we will learn more about our main characters, and hopefully I'll form more of an attachment to them. But as of now, I'm just feeling kind of meh about this, you know. Chandler did bring up a good point in our live show that she thinks this is just a money grab, and I can't argue with that. I think that there are a lot of people out there that love the Folk of the Air trilogy with their hearts and souls like I do, and so there's a lot of money to be made to continue on in this world. All right, let's actually get into the books that I loved in January, though I already brought up the Cruel Prince trilogy. I also wanted to quickly bring up that I really enjoyed The Wicked King more, book 2, more than I did the first time around when I read this series, and I think the audiobooks helped with that. The audiobooks of this series are very well done in my opinion, by the way. I really like the narrator that they got. But when I first read this series, I gave The Wicked King 4 stars. It was actually my least favorite book of the series, but upon reread, I get the hype. I get why it's such a fan favorite of the series. I had to up my rating to 5 stars. I just wanted to quickly update that. But let's get on into more of my favorites. By the way, these are not all of the books that I gave 5 stars in January. These are the books that just truly stand out in my mind. So I do have a couple of books on this list that I gave 4 stars, but they're just like so iconic and interesting that I still wanted to bring them up. But most of the books on this list that I have are going to be 5 stars. So speaking of 5 stars, my very first read of 2022 was a 5-star and a home run, as I knew it was going to be. And that is Saga Volume 3 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. First things first that I have to bring up about this volume is we gotta look at the back together. Can we appreciate how they drew Marco and Alana, our 2 main characters, as if they're on a historical romance cover? Thank you. Thank you. You are giving the people what they want. Okay, but if you don't know, this is volume 3 of a now 10-volume epic sci-fi comic series that has a very strong romantic plot to it, hence the amazing clinch cover on the back. And I really wanted to start off the year with an amazing read, and I knew that Saga was gonna give me that, and it definitely did. And this series truly gets better and better with each volume. I just kind of wanted to quickly show you guys what a page of the artwork looks like. Oh, it's just so well done. This series makes me feel so many things, and it's just like so epic and action-packed, and like, oh man, this world that Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples has created is just unreal. It's absolutely spectacular. So next up, we have a couple of 4-star reads that I had to bring up. First one is Lap of Luxury by Brianna Hale. So this is book 2 in her, it's a duet. I can't remember what the duet is called, but this is book 2, and I hate to be that person, but you absolutely do need to read book 1, which is Come to Daddy. I really enjoyed that too. I also gave that one 4 stars, but this one, you guys, is so amazing and iconic. So this is definitely a darker romance duet. These are also the first books that I have read by Brianna Hale. I'm definitely gonna read more from her because I really enjoyed this duet, and I also really enjoyed a couple of novellas by her, and I'm gonna bring those up later in the video. But this book specifically is about Damir, who is a psychopath. He is the brother of the hero from book 1. Then we have Bethany, who is the hero from book 1's secretary, and Damir kidnaps Bethany and keeps her on his yacht, and for that reason alone it was giving me vibes of Mafia Madman by Mila Finelli, but it was also giving me vibes of that book because this is a deliciously twisted and unhinged romance because, like I said, Damir's a psychopath pretty much, and Bethany is really into horror movies and into being scared to the point where it gets her off. And so Damir learns this, and he's more than happy to oblige her and create these kind of like horror movie-esque scenarios so that they can have some fun times with each other. And this was so good. Like, this was a very unique romance because of that dynamic between the two of them. And the only reason why I didn't give this 5 stars is that the last 30% of this book focuses on this like suspenseful plot that has to do with both of the couples of the duet and how like someone's after them basically, or maybe somebody's just after Damir, I can't quite remember. And so because of that, it wasn't focusing on Damir and Bethany's romance, which is what I wanted from this book. So unfortunately I wasn't quite as engaged in that last chunk of the book, hence why I gave it 4 stars. But I highly recommend checking out this duet. It was such a fun time. And if you enjoy captor-captive romances in particular, you're really going to enjoy Lap of Luxury in particular. The other 4-star read that I have to bring up is The Awakening of Ivy Leibold by Sierra Simone. This is a book and a historical romance series that came highly recommended from Jen from the Book Refuge. She told me that it was like a spicy version of Jane Eyre, which of course that's gonna entice me to pick up this series because you give me a gothic romance with Sierra Simone level steam. That sounds perfect. So we have our main character, Ivy Leibold. She lost her parents at a very young age. She was living with her brother for quite some time. Her brother passes away, and so her only living relative is Julian, who was married to Ivy's now dead cousin. So they're not related by blood, they're only related through marriage. And so she comes to live on this very like gothic, creepy kind of estate with him. And we see that he's one of those like typical gothic romance, like morally gray kind of heroes. And she's this innocent heroine, but she has a backbone to her. She has some spunk. And oh my God, the vibe, guys, of this was just perfection to me. Like, it truly gave all those gothic romance vibes. And oh my God, does Sierra Simone serve the steam? Oh my God, like this was so freaking good. You know, we're seeing Julian and Ivy, you know, exploring their attraction to each other, but then there was also this iconic orgy scene. And this is a series of, I believe, 4 novellas. I think each novella is about 150 pages. So it's a relatively quick read. And I actually really like series like this that are broken up into smaller novellas. I really liked how this first one ended. And I'm just really excited to read the next installment, The Education of Ivy Leibold, ASAP. It's definitely on my February TBR. Next, I want to talk about another Brianna Hale. This is a novella. It's called Gym Bunny. So this is book 2 in her Dom Fitness novella series. I did also read book 1, which is called Dom Fitness. I gave that one 4 stars, but this one, you guys, was so amazing. It made me just straight up emotional. So this is a personal trainer romance series. I have now come to the conclusion that that trope is everything to me. Oh my God, I am obsessed. I have another one that I read this month that I want to talk about as well. If you have more recommendations for that trope, please leave them in the comments below. I've been having a hard time finding them on my own, whether it be through Goodreads or Google, so please give me your recommendations. But this is a novella series that centers around this gym called Dom Fitness, where all the trainers are Doms and the people that come to train there are subs. Nothing sexual happens between the trainers and their clients, but you still have that Dom sub relationship and dynamic going on. And so book 1 was more of like a brat and like stern daddy dom situation, whereas this one is about Trey. He's definitely a softer kind of dom. And then we have Livia, who is a plus-sized heroine, as you can probably guess from the cover. And she was in a relationship with someone who was a dom, but he was very cruel and toxic to her. Definitely not a healthy dom sub relationship, and so she has a lot of trauma from that. So as she's walking back and forth from work, she keeps coming across Dom Fitness, and Trey, our hero, is just passing out flyers out front, and she's just terrified of the idea of a gym where the trainers are doms. And so basically throughout the novella, Trey breaks through her walls and makes her realize that you know, this kind of relationship can be a very healthy thing. And like I said, this one just made me emotional because he was just so amazing and loving to Olivia and her body. You know, a big thing throughout this novella is that he is her personal trainer, but he's not trying to make her lose weight. She doesn't want to lose weight. She just wants to work out to just feel better, because you know, when you work out, you have the rise of endorphins, you just feel better, you feel happier. And so that's what she wants. She's not trying to change herself, and he's certainly not trying to change her either. And so this was just amazing. This little series came highly recommended from Bree from Unloved Words, by the way. And man, thank you so much, Bree, for this recommendation, because this was not on my radar at all. And I'm so glad that I read these novellas in January. So next up, let's get to my favorite manga read of January. And that, of course, is Sweat and Soap, Volume 5 by Kintetsu Yamada. So this is a romance slice of life manga series that centers around Notori and Asako. So this volume in particular takes place in the winter time, as you can tell. I love this cover so much, specifically around Christmas and New Year's. And so we see them celebrate that time of year together for the first time as a couple. And they're also in the process of moving in together. And so we see the two of them finding various apartments, seeing which one fits their needs best. And I know that sounds like it would be so boring, right? Absolutely so boring, but I'm telling you, the way this author writes this couple, I am so invested in just the most mundane things that these two do together. It doesn't make any sense, right? Because usually when I'm reading romance novels, for instance, I hate when there's like very lengthy epilogues. I find them very boring. But with this one, like, this author still manages to keep their relationship interesting. There's still little obstacles that get in their way, but they have very healthy communication. They always talk it out, and they are just like the sweetest with each other. Also, the back cover, that's her parents, and then and then her brother and their cat, like, so freaking cute. Oh man, talking about this series just makes me so freaking happy. And if you guys still haven't taken my recommendation and tried out Sweat and Soap, like, what are you doing? If I have to start bullying you into trying it out, I will. I am not ashamed to resort to that, you know? So next up, let's get to a paranormal historical romance that I really enjoyed in January. That is Kiss of Steel by Beck McMaster. I have been meaning to try out this author probably for years at this point. She's more well known for writing fantasy romances recently, but as far as I can tell, her first few series are more these like steampunk paranormal historical romances. So this is book 1 in her London steampunk series. So in this world, there are two types of vampiric creatures. We have the blue bloods. So all of the aristocracy of London have this virus that is only passed among the aristocracy. And so it makes them into basically vampires, and they're superior beings to the rest of the population, right? But this virus can go too far. Like, I think if you starve yourself of blood, if you don't let yourself consume it, you will essentially be overtaken by bloodlust, and you will become this like mindless monster, and they are known as vampires. So you have blue bloods and you have vampires. Vampires are very rare, but we see in this very first book that there is a vampire going around and killing people. And so we have Blade, our hero, who is a blue blood. He's kind of a self-made man. He has this like underground empire, basically, and he rules this certain part of London. And then we have Honoria, who's just trying to make ends meet. She has a younger brother and sister that she's trying to take care of. So over the course of the book, she's been having run-ins with Blade, our hero, and they have this insane chemistry and attraction to each other. And she realizes that her only chance to survive is to become what is known as a blood whore. So basically she will supply blood to Blade, but nothing else. And so over the course of the book, they start falling for each other and things go on from there. So this series gives me vibes of darker historical romances. Think like the Maiden Lane series by Elizabeth Hoyt. The Victorian Rebels series by Kerrigan Byrne definitely has a dark vibe. Also, a lot of Lorraine Heath historicals give me that kind of vibe. But you also have this really cool steampunk paranormal vibe of like The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. And so combining all those elements together into one story is just a recipe for success, in my opinion. And I think Beck McMaster does an amazing job with that. This was paced really well. I think I ended up giving this like 4.5 stars. It was very close to being a 5-star read for me. We had a lot of action. Romance was really great, like I said. I loved the paranormal aspects of like what this virus is, and there's other things going on in this story with Honoria and like her father, things like that. It's just a really cool concept for a series, so very excited to continue on. So next up we have Weightless by Candy Steiner. This is another personal trainer romance that has been on my radar for quite some time because Candy Steiner herself is amazing at marketing her own books. She's just really great at making Instagram reels where she will feature like certain scenes from her books, and it just makes you want to read them. Like, I remember a scene that she featured in one of her reels was in this book where we have Rhodes, who is a personal trainer, and then we have Natalie, our heroine. This is also a new adult romance, by the way. She's 18, I believe he's 21. And so there is this amazing scene where they're starting to fall for each other, and he makes her look into a mirror and tell him the parts of her body that she doesn't like about herself. She's very insecure, and she is like a curvy plus size heroine. And so as she's naming these parts of herself that she doesn't love, he kisses each part, and it's just the sweetest and swooniest thing ever. And so her talking about that scene alone made me want to pick up this book, and I'm so glad that I did because I gave it 5 stars. So yeah, like I said, we have Rhodes and we have Natalie at the very beginning of the book. Her boyfriend of quite some time breaks up with her and immediately dates this much thinner girl, and so she assumes that he must have broken up with her because of her size. And so she's just not feeling great about herself, and her mother tells her about this personal trainer that they have at their country club. And so Natalie agrees to start taking some sessions with him. And so Rhodes is a grumpy hero for sure. There's just this really beautiful relationship that develops between the two of them. They definitely start off not really liking each other. It's not quite hate to love, but there's just a lot of tension between the two of them, and over the course of the story we see that it leads to more. And Candy Steiner, I just think, is so good at writing angst. Like, I feel like this book had the perfect amount of push and pull of that angst. And there's also like a suspense element towards the end that I thought was really well done as well. So I highly recommend this if you want a grumpy hero who is secretly sweet. He's also damaged. And I love Natalie's character development as well, how Rhodes helps her, you know, truly realize her beauty, and she helps him realize how amazing he is as well. I have 2 books left to talk about. One is Station 11, which is one of the very few non-romance books that I read in January. Just like with reading nonfiction, I want to read more like literary fiction, just like non-romance books this year as well. I'm very glad that I finally read this. So this was also recently made into an adaptation on HBO Max. I don't have HBO Max, so I haven't watched it. This is such a cool story, and I honestly don't even know where to start with my explanation. So at the very beginning of this book, we have this man, Arthur Leander. He is a famous Hollywood actor. He is performing the title role in King Lear in somewhere in Canada. And so one night during one of his performances, he has a heart attack and dies. Like, that literally is the first chapter of the book. And so we see how that event connects with this crazy pandemic that happens. By the way, this was written in 2014, and this kind of feels like our COVID pandemic, but like on steroids. This pandemic is absolutely insane because people are dying within 24 hours of being exposed to this virus. And so now we pick up the story 20 years later, and like 99% of the world's population has died. and we are following this group of musicians and actors known as the Traveling Symphony. They travel around their region of the United States and Canada, and they just perform Shakespeare and perform musical concerts for these little towns that are springing up over the years. And there's also some really interesting like suspenseful elements going on. This was such a cool and interesting story. Like I said, I really love how all of these different events and characters are connected with one another. I thought that it was beautifully written. I'm very excited to check out more from Emily St. John Mandel. This book also felt like a love letter to artists of all art forms, and if you don't know anything about me, the reason why my channel is Rachel Reads and Sings is because I'm an opera singer, I'm also an actor, and I perform in musicals. I love musical theater. So this book really spoke to me in how like the end of the world, like this apocalypse situation, interacts with art itself and humanity. And it was just so beautifully done. And even though it was a little bit triggering to read about a global pandemic, this was also oddly enough kind of comforting, because it was easy to relate to the kinds of things that these characters are going through. Obviously, like I said, this pandemic is on like an unreal astronomical scale. This is definitely a book that will stick with me for years to come. And then last but certainly not least, we have one of the last books that I read in January. I did not expect to love this book as much as I did. Oh my God. This is The Heir by Sophie Lark. This is book 1 in her Kingmaker Chronicles series. This is like the next generation spin-off of the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark, which I read that series last year. Absolutely loved those books. And so I did have high expectations going into this, and this did not disappoint. But basically the main romance in this is between Leo and Anna, who are the next generation of this whole mafia world and family. But the two of them, they are cousins, but only through marriage, not through blood. But there is this university called Kingmakers, which is this ruthless mafia university in the middle of nowhere on this isolated island. And so this is a romance series, but it also is all about this university and like all these different characters and the tea and the drama. There's action. There's an amazing love triangle in this that I did not expect. So we do get 3 POVs. We get Leo, Anna, like I said, and then Dean. And this is essentially his villain origin story. It was everything to me. Over the course of the book, both Leo and Dean are fighting for Anna's affections. And we see that the love between Leo and Anna, though, I mean, they loved each other all their lives. And it's just such a special relationship that there's no way that Dean could ever live up to that, you know? And so over the course of the book, he just becomes more and more bitter. And by the end, he is truly becoming this iconic villain, and I cannot wait for his book. He's going to be the main character in The Bully, which is book 3. Oh my God, this was amazing. And there's also like this interesting competition that was like almost giving me Hunger Games vibe. This series as a whole gives you like Harry Potter, Vampire Academy, and Gossip Girl vibes, probably like other series that I can't quite think of off the top of my head, but like you get all of those elements as well as just this really great friends to lovers romance. Like, was this the best romance that I've ever read by Sophie Lark? No, but when you combine it with all these other elements, I was absolutely obsessed. The writing is amazing. Yes, this is kind of a chunky book, but this story takes place over a whole school year. Like, there's a lot going on at this college, and oh man, I'm just so freaking excited to continue on with the series. That is going to be it for the good, the bad, and the ugly that I read in January. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss these books, if you want to give me recommendations for myself or for anyone else who's watching. I would definitely appreciate that as well. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe. And I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!